is going to happen. Hey, Morgan. So this week, are we scared or scary?
Anil, we are so scary this week, and I can't wait to get started.
So scary. So today, we're going to talk about navigating the eerie echo chamber where feedback falls on deaf ears. And we're going to uncover some of those sinister consequences of ignoring the voices around you, not necessarily the voices in your head, but the people that are talking to you around you, and learn how to truly listen and act on what you hear. And the kind of three big things we're going to focus on today are: what's the importance of authentic leadership and creating a feedback culture? How do we understand the impact of disingenuous leadership on employee trust? And what are some of the strategies that we've seen and that others who are smarter and better at all of this have done to do this effectively? So, Maura, what have you seen in regards to feedback to kind of create a culture where it's truly valued and acted on?
Well, yeah, so feedback is one of those interesting things. And, I've been around long enough that I think feedback is the new, we have an open door policy, right? So, back in the day, we have an open door policy. You can walk right in and tell me anything you want. But we all know that that's not exactly the way those open door policies work. And sometimes it's just, a marketing hooey. Like, hey, we say that because we want you to feel like you can come and talk to us, but we don't really mean it. And I find that feedback is kind of the same way.
Mm.
And my experience has been, and we'll dive into all of the like why I feel that way as we progress, but my experience has been in terms of creating a feedback culture that it starts with your values, and you need to live that every single day. So if you say you value feedback, then if someone comes to you with feedback, you need to put your pencil down, stop your work, focus on what that person is bringing to you, right? And really take it on board. And that's really hard to do. And there's some strategies that I think we'll get into in the second half of this podcast about how to really implement that in your workplace. But it all comes down to really making feedback and valuing feedback a core part of your company's culture. That's where you start.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. And it really is that whole notion of, I hear this all the time. And since we kind of came from the same place a little while ago, right, this whole notion that feedback is a gift. And it feels like sometimes it's not a gift because sometimes it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's just bitching. And so the notion that like every little piece of feedback is like this gift that I have to, oh, thank you for the feedback. I'm so appreciative of how awesome that is. And you took the time to share your garbage opinion with me. That's so I feel like there's a difference between feedback, like some honest kind of constructive criticism or praise, and just this notion of I want to unload on you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think so that's one thing. And then this idea of creating a culture of feedback, it's that I'm really gonna pay attention to you. Um,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And
Like, no, that's
I think there's a flip side too to the, the quality of the feedback one is
mm,
getting. On the flip side of that coin is if if I'm in a role and I'm asking you, Anil, for your feedback, I need to be sincere in that ask, right? So if I ask you for feedback, that means I'm willing to listen to you and take that feedback on board, right? I
Right.
may not go with your feedback, but I need to like weigh it wholly in the grand scheme of things. And I get particularly frustrated when folks say, hey, this is a straw person that I put together and I want your feedback. And
Yeah.
I've actually been burned so many times on this that I say, do you really want my feedback?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or are you telling me this is what we're going to do? Because if this is what we're going to do, I'm a big girl. Just tell me that and we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's super important. Either are willing to take the feedback on board and it's a collaborative process or it's not. And the gray stuff in between is a morale killer.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I feel like, so I worked at a place, I won't name them because I don't want to get sued, for a person who was at a senior level. And this gender non-specific person used to say to me, sorry, well, I know, I mean, like, I want to be as ambiguous as possible because who knows, right? So this person says to me, um, on a regular basis, what's your opinion? And I would say, are you sure you want to hear my opinion? And they
Mm-hmm.
would say, yes, I want your honest feedback, unfiltered. So you know me, Morgan. I would give them my opinion based on my personal experience and my feeling about the situation. And we were all leaders in that room. We led big
Mm-hmm.
parts of the organization. And she would say, sorry, this gender non-specific person would say, your opinion is wrong. That's wrong.
What?
Right? And I would be like, what the F? What are you talking about? That's not a real thing. And so that I think that's that whole nature of, or whole notion of creating a culture of feedback where it's validated and valued and acted upon. Like, look, you don't have to act on my feedback or on my opinion, but it is valid, right? But what I think is what I think. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we kind of have come to this place where we're voicing this notion of feedback as a gift or as something that we have to
Mm-hmm.
take in, but it's not really valued, and people know that, right?
Yeah.
That's not a mystery. That's not a secret. um, and so I think that whole notion
Mm-hmm.
of creating a culture of feedback is one where, like you said, put your pencil down, stop typing, um, and really listen and react. And when you're giving feedback, don't kind of couch it in something else. Right? I had another person that I worked for who um, would always couch feedback in this: tell me how you're doing, tell me how things are going. And you would talk about how things were going, and then they would unload on you about all the things you're doing wrong. And it's like, that doesn't help.
That's awful.
Yeah, that doesn't help, right? So anyway, all right. So creating that culture of feedback.
That's so traumatizing. That
It
is
is.
so, don't
It
do this for our listeners. Do not do that with your employees.
Yeah, I would say, like, don't start a conversation about how you are if what you're going to end up with is a gut punch. Like, just punch me already. Like, don't make
Yes.
me anticipate or wait for the punch. Don't make me
Yeah.
flinch for 30 minutes.
I
Um,
I I worked at a company for a really short time as the VP of people. And it was interesting and chaotic and wonderful and horrible and all the things. Um, but it was at this company where I really understood what it meant to have a feedback culture and how to do that. the correct way. And man, they stood behind it. You could give a senior leader feedback in a room full of 20 people, and you could be absolutely sure there would be no repercussions because of it, right? They did it correctly. But one of the things that they always coached is that you need to ask people if you can give them feedback, and is this a good time for them? Okay, because sometimes people need to get in the headspace to receive feedback. And I'm personally one of those people. If someone came to me like they did to you, Anil, in your example, I would probably be contemplating another career, right? I was like, why did you do that to me? Just give me the feedback, or at least warn me that this feedback is coming. So, um, I, I would offer that to the listeners, that, just ask, hey, I have some feedback for you. Are you open to hearing that feedback? And is now a good time?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's such great coaching. And as we're kind of talking about it, I think there's kind of some fundamentals as you're creating this kind of culture of feedback, or this environment where people can kind of talk together honestly. And I think, right, if I kind of list them out, and if this is valuable, we can share this with people, or they can ignore it, which is fine either way. So, I mean, I think one is that you got to be willing to listen. You got to be willing to act and not retaliate. Like you said, you got to ask for permission, right? So, is this a good time? Do you mind if I give you some feedback, whatever that is? You want to use a framework, right? Like a common method to kind of give feedback. I think there's a ton of them out there. I have a couple that I've utilized. Morgan, I know you've got some too, but whatever it is, use a something, right? That kind of gives you a framework. And then the final thing is follow up, right? Like, don't just give the feedback and then run away and hope for the best, right? I think there's some opportunity here to say, let's let's give that feedback, and then on a regular basis, either allow that person to follow up with you, or as a leader, you're going to follow up with them to kind of check in. How did that go? How are
Yeah,
things going? What happened
yeah.
based on our conversation?
Well, the exciting thing, Anil, is that we have an upcoming episode that's going to go deep into specifically how you give good feedback. And I'm really, really looking forward to that. Um, for our audience today, and you're a leader, I want to talk about, as a leader, how you want to get feedback, and also about what happens when you say you want feedback, but you don't really want feedback, and maybe how that impacts employee trust.
That's such a good question, right? I think so. Personally, how I want somebody to give me feedback. First of all, I want them to ask, right? Like for permission. Um, and then I really just want the feedback. Like, I want you to tell me what happened, what was the impact, how you would like me to act differently in the future, or more of the same, and then um, how you might help me with implementing that feedback. And I mean, the folks that I work with, that I get to lead as part of the team, they know they can tell me anything.
Do you
Um,
have an example of
uh,
some time when you got feedback and you thought, oh, that's good feedback, and I like the way that worked out?
yeah, actually, just recently, I have a really good, I have an example that really worked for me. So, um, we're going through a big change in the organization, and um, I had I had known about a decision ahead of time before it was going to get rolled out, and it impacted everybody on the team. And when I shared it, people were shocked, obviously. And the feedback that I got was, and I thought this was great, was that you don't have to tell us what's coming, but if you know we're going to be working on something that's going to change, just let us know not to, and what we should be spending our time on instead. And that it,
Mm,
and that
yes.
we don't have, like, because
Yeah.
there were some people that put effort into things
Oh,
that were
yeah.
just, yeah, and bad on me. And
Yeah.
we're always learning, right? I've been in the work world for, I don't know, 112 years now, and you'd think by now I would have made every mistake, but that's not true. So
Mm,
so that's actually some feedback I got, and it was really great. And they said it like almost exactly like that, and it really hit home for me.
mm,
I thought I was actually kind of protecting them from learning this information because I didn't want to start a rumor mill, but it was good to
mm,
know, right? Like that was really good, straight feedback. And I think, I've definitely been in the position where uh, I've gotten feedback and not done anything with it. And it's really turned out to be a big mistake not to. Um, I when I was at Discover Financial Services a long, long time ago, we went through a big org change. I got a new team, and I got some feedback about a person on that team who really wasn't pulling their weight, and um, I didn't do anything about it. And
mm,
it ended
mhm.
up that that person made a mistake that cost the company a lot of money. And then I had to talk to him about it. But had I stepped in a little bit earlier with that feedback, I would have been able to kind of head that off at the pass, and really help that, and help the team out and help that employee out much more rapidly.
Yeah. I remember a time I got some feedback from a peer, and this was definitely at a point in my career where I thought I knew everything about everything and that I could do everything on my own and I was the best of, at doing things. So I have to say it took a lot of guts for this guy to give me the feedback. Let's just start there. Um, but he was really sweet and he asked me to come into his office. He did the whole may I give you some feedback thing. And he told me that some people may not be receptive to what I'm doing because of the way I'm approaching the situation, that he liked my idea, but he thought I was alienating people.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, well, what would you do differently then? Because, I was in that headspace. And then he gave me a very thorough and detailed response about what he would do differently. And I was like, yeah, 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 that's a lot better. That we're doing that. So I ended up for the rest of the time I was at that company, anytime I was about to make a big move or a big communication, I would run it by this guy and say, am I alienating anybody with this move? And he would always give me an honest answer. And I love that about him.
That's awesome. I really love that as kind of a methodology, and it really showcases that notion of the importance of authentic feedback. And he really, just in that one interaction, kind of established that culture of feedback,
Mhm.
giving you the option to really listen in, to give you a potential remedy, and to make it an option for you to go back and kind of check
Yeah,
in with that person, right? I mean, that's like, uh if let's call him Gary, like everybody should be like Gary.
I
Like you
agree.
should definitely do that thing. That's a great way to establish that kind of foundation. um
Honestly, it changed my relationship with this person.
mm,
And I just want to, for everybody listening, feedback can be scary and you think, I don't want someone to not like me. I mean, honestly, just the opposite happened when he gave me that feedback. I'm like, dude, I totally respect you for what you just did. Thank you so much. Like, thank you for having my back. And I've never forgotten it.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I think What a great example. And so what about disingenuous leadership on employee trust, like feigning interest in listening to feedback? In your experience, what's the impact of that?
Um, well, I mean, there's a lot of emotions that come to mind for me when I think about those situations. Um, and you know me, I'm really direct. When someone says, I want your feedback on this thing I created, look, it's beautiful, it's my thing, it's the most awesome thing, and I want your feedback. I always go, do you really want my feedback? Just like you did, Anil, with your earlier example. And I listen very closely. I'll give my, considered feedback, and I'll listen very closely with the way they respond to my feedback. And you can tell almost immediately whether or not they were genuinely seeking feedback or if it was performative. And I've had a couple really major crossroads in my career where it was clear to me that the person did not really want my feedback, despite the fact they kept asking me over and over and over for my feedback.
Yeah.
And then what's really crazy is in one circumstance, I gave this person my feedback, and they're like, hey, I need you to go and push my agenda to your peers. I'm like, well, I would do that if I agreed with it. But for my feedback, here's what I think the challenges are going to be at this moment. And it kind of broke my relationship with that manager. I got to be honest. It broke me. It broke my trust in that person. I was skeptical of everything they asked or said from that point forward because I knew they'd be duplicitous. So they weren't actually going to tell me their real motivation. And I found it very frustrating. I'd rather just people treat me like a professional and say, I'd like to hear your thoughts, but at the end of the day, Morgan, we're moving forward with this, right? And then I can frame my feedback differently if I know you're getting like, okay, so let me tell you a couple gotchas maybe we need to work around in order to make this thing work. But I'd rather just be treated like a professional, honestly.
That is awesome. And that notion of what's the impact of disingenuous leadership or kind of feigning interesting feedback, I think you summarize that really well. It's that you second guess when anybody's asking you
Mm-hmm.
for opinion, and quite honestly, unless you're a glutton for punishment or a sadist like me, you don't keep giving it. And what
That's
you get,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
What you get is a culture of silence
Mm-hmm.
and rumor and undermining and all of that sort of thing. And what you get when you are honest about, like, look, this is kind of the way forward. I want to talk to you about it and kind of get your thoughts. You're more willing because they're giving you kind of the honest, forthright, like, we're going to do this. You can help them
Mm-hmm.
with gotchas along the way. And then you can know the difference between they're asking me for my feedback, they want my opinion, versus they want kind of help with where this idea could get tripped up. Um, so the like underlying to me is that the impact on employee trust is that it undermines it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you don't trust.
Yeah. I think we should give the leaders listening to this today some tools
Yeah, let's do it.
for feedback. I'm going to start with a short story. When my daughter was a teenager, I thought less rules were better because when there's too many rules, then it gets confusing for everybody. So we only had 3 rules. It's like, hey, I need to know where you are. So If you disappear, I can tell the police where to look first for your body. Number two, tell me if you move from one location to the next location. Same reason. Three, always communicate with me honestly, right? Always be honest with me. And that's how we got through the teenage years. Now, on the flip side of that, we had those honest conversations, and I told my daughter, you can tell me anything. I'm not going to get mad. I'm here to listen to you. And I literally had to sit on my hands. Like there were times where I was like doing woo-saw, deep breathing as she was telling me stuff. And I'm like, I promised her I wasn't going to react. I am listening to her. I am hearing what she's saying. And so I got used to just like letting it wash over me and hearing it and saying, is there anything you need from me? And sometimes it was yes, and sometimes it was no. And but it's really hard. So I think, my advice to the listeners is you've got to practice getting into the headspace of receiving tough feedback or feedback. You really got to, sit on your hands, open your ears, and let the information come, listen to it, and then be curious, right? So if you give me a piece of feedback, to your example earlier, what can I do differently, right? What would make this better for you? Do you need anything from me? Is there any specific action, et cetera? What does that look like? So be curious and not defensive would be what I would say.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, I 100% agree with all of those. I think the only thing that I would add is that when you're in a work situation, that oftentimes you want to make sure that you understand the context of
Mm,
of what they're talking about. And maybe it's not just a work situation, maybe it's in every situation. That context, contextualizing things is really, really important because
mm,
when you're talking to a customer versus when you're talking to somebody internally versus when you're talking to a stakeholder or a teammate or your boss, it's all going to be a little different. And you need some code switching, quite honestly, to kind of understand what to use in the right situation. But I mean, I think that notion of you want to practice getting into that headspace, listen without interrupting, listen without judgment as much as possible.
mm,
One tactic that I use is I don't take notes, partly because I don't like to take notes, and partially because it requires me to focus on that person and
yeah,
not try to get the essence of what they're saying. And then to be curious, like you're saying, like make sure you
yeah,
ask the question, what do you need from me? How can I help? What could you have done differently? Any of those questions all work. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a remarkable strategy. And like you said, Morgan, we're definitely going to talk about some specific frameworks and how they can be utilized. But this is a good sort of generic strategy that you could use as a leader or a parent.
yeah,
So,
exactly. It's the same thing.
right? Yes, yes. Yeah, that's one of the things you learn after 112 years at work. So anything else before we kind of wrap up for today and talking about feedback fails, feedback issues?
I think I would just reiterate, if you want feedback, ask for it. If you don't ask for feedback.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. Very cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.